Okay, Tommy and Patty, here is my permaculture design for your site for Alderman Farms. And if you'll permit me, the first thing I'm going to do is speak a little bit about the history of your property, the climatology of it, and things that may already be familiar to you, but then we'll move into the design portion of my little presentation here. So Alderman Farms is located near the city of Brookhaven, Mississippi in the Northern Hemisphere in the United States of America. It is approximately 120 miles northwest of the Gulf of Mexico and ranges in elevation from 400 to 500 feet. This site is a location that has been in the property since about 1850. Other than having timber harvest off of it, it has had no major operations and no agricultural production outside of whatever those living at the area have done for their own homesteading needs. So there may have been gardens in the past, and there are certainly gardens and some farm animals in the present. However, I know that you are currently doing everything to avoid chemicals and other additives that are not natural, so there's no concern on my part for the health of the property in general. I was able to visit your property back on June 14th, and we walked a large portion of the property and got to see a lot of different features and elements of your site. One thing that I took away is that even though a satellite image clearly shows this to be a forested area, taking a walk around your property showed me that it is largely a deciduous forest, though there are coniferous trees throughout it as well. Though there are a few areas that have been clear cut before and replanted with pine for use for timber in the future. But you have some certain desires about those areas, and we'll talk about them in just a few minutes. You have already had the National Resources Convention Service come out to your land and try to locate areas where you could establish ponds to provide water to your livestock. However, they only identified one area that you would be able to create a dam without having to bring in additional resources. At this point, you're not interested in bringing in additional resources to create dams, so that site's the only feasible location for you. But I think we've got some other options with water throughout your property that we will discuss. This image illustrates the portion of your property that is included in the design by this black border. It also illustrates the general orientation of your land with this compass rose, and the fact that you're in the northern hemisphere. The sun illustrates that the sun will pass along the southern exposure of your property. One unique thing about your property is you have one section of land where the home is, and then catty corner to it, or adjacent to it on the corner, is another section of property. This is a contour map that I obtained through the Mississippi Digital Earth Model Project and is most representative of what I saw when I was at your site. I don't present it to you to say that it is a true representation of every contour on your property, but it will provide us the general guideline that we need to understand where we can put elements throughout your property. These two dots illustrate the high and low point on your property. Here in this new growth pine, at the green dot is the highest elevation at about 500 feet, and down here at the yellow dot, where the year-round creek exits your property, is the lowest part of your property at about 400 feet elevation. So you have a 100-foot elevation throughout your entire property. As you well know, you have a lot of sloping areas throughout your property. Some of them are nice gentle slopes, like as we look from the top of this hill going toward the homestead, it's a nice gentle slope. But there are other areas, like down here near the creek, where the land changes elevation quite quickly. We will have to take this into consideration as we place elements throughout your site to make sure that we are making best use of these contours. Let's talk a little bit about your existing access paths. Your property is currently bordered on two sides by public roads, primarily on the west and north side of your property. You also have a driveway that comes down to two different homes. We'll discuss those a little bit more in the future. That's represented by this orange line. And then this green line represents different walking or other access paths throughout your property. You have a fire line that goes between the newly planted pine and your homestead area. You also have various places where the power company has cut trees for access. And you also have walking property around the borders of your property, going to a couple different structures at the rear of the property. The main difference between these two different types of paths is that the orange driveway path is accessible by a large vehicle such as a pickup truck with a trailer, whereas the green paths are accessible by foot or on something like a four-wheeler. Now let's talk about the structures on your property. You have your home that you live in currently, along with another home that a family member lives in. When they are no longer occupying it, your intention is to move from your current home to this home. Between these two homes, there are two different storage areas. You also have a location for your bees, your current garden, a barn and coop, and also your hog house. Toward the rear of your property, you have a campsite at the location that was the original home site, and you have a shoot house for hunting. Now let's talk about the climate for your location. You live in a hot and humid temperate location. This image represents the path of the sun at the summer solstice, or the longest day of the year, which for us occurs on June 21st. You can see that the sun is going to rise in the northeast and is going to follow a very high arc from east to west and set in the northwest. The contours of your property and this path of the sun lets us know that during the summer you're going to have a long growing season and almost every part of your property is going to be fully accessible by the sun. This image represents the winter solstice, and as we can see, the sun will rise in the southeast and set in the southwest at a very low arc across the sky. While this may limit the amount of sunlight that reaches certain slopes on your property, none of those slopes are areas where we would want to have crop gardens anyway. I don't foresee this being an impact on the design on your property. This image represents the prevailing winds throughout the summer months of June, July, and August. The length of each segment represents the frequency of wind coming from a particular direction. As we can see from this graph, wind seems to prevail from a south-southwest direction. Winds throughout the summer months only average 6 miles per hour. This image represents the prevailing winds throughout the winter months of December, January, and February. Interestingly, wind seems to occur just as frequently from the south as it does from the north, but our design will take this into consideration. In the winter, we have more storms than we do in the summer, and the winds seem to average a little bit higher at 12 miles per hour. There is one view that you brought to my attention from the new home toward this particular storage building that you would rather not be able to see. We will take that into account for the design, but you have told me that otherwise every other view on your site is considered a good view. Your property is contained by many different borders. You have public roads on your east and north, you have creeks running across your property in the west, and you also have a clearing from the power company throughout the south. Because of this and your knowledge of the history of this area, the only real concern for fire is where it might originate on the property that could be spread to the home. The largest risk for this is your newly planted pine. However, we have to realize that there is a fire break between this area and your property. This area is also on a slope that would tend to take the fire away from your home, and the prevailing winds would take the fire away from your home. So while this is the greatest danger, no specific design elements will be put into place to try to limit a danger for fire. You have also told me that because of the location of your site, that there are generally no noise concerns that you are worried about trying to address. So now that we fully understand the location of the site and its history and the climate around it, let's move into a bit of what you actually desire to do with the land. You told me that what you want to do is expand what you're already doing to a point where this farm can be self-sustaining and provide an income for your family. Right now, you already raise cattle, goat, swine, and chicken on pasture. You want to expand those pastures so that you can carry more animals. You also want to expand your current gardening and crop areas so that you can provide more food to your local market. You did tell me that there are some limitations to designs to your home that you don't want to take into account, but that there are some designs that you do want to take into account, and that you would be very interested to learn more about just how much water you can collect from the hard surfaces of your property, primarily because of the difficulties that you encountered in trying to see about making dams on your property. You told me that right now the time that you can devote to this land is somewhat limited, but as the farm grows, you intend to provide the time that it would need to encourage that growth. As such, we understand that the design that I'm going to present to you is not something that we would try to put into effect over a short period of time, but rather would be phased in as you bring more animals and more crops into the site. You told me that your energy needs are fairly low, that because of the location of the site you stay relatively warm throughout the winter, and though you do use a wood stove, it's fairly infrequent and you're comfortable with continuing to use that as a heating source. Though you would like to see a way for you to bring more cool air into the home to try to limit the amount of energy that you consume throughout the summer months. Your site already runs on well water, but you are interested in how you can use these hard surfaces and rainwater to supply your livestock and garden needs so that you don't have to rely on that water resource from the well to provide for those needs. You told me that you want this site to be sustainable so that you can maintain it and not have to bring in outside resources, and so that there are as many connections between elements as possible. And so that is what the design is going to entail. You showed me the creek that runs year-round through your property and explained to me that you have different areas where springs come and provide water. You also have surface runoff from many acres that go into ravines that we may be able to capture and redistribute throughout the property. Now that we have a full understanding of the history of your property and how you want to move forward with it, we can step into the designs. Let's first start with the three main elements of your property: access, water, and structures. Let's start with the access paths, and specifically the paths that I'm calling passenger vehicle accessible. More realistically, what I'm envisioning here are the paths where you may need to drive a vehicle that can haul animals, such as a pickup truck with a trailer attached to it. I think you should still use this access point near the road frontage, but instead of cutting a straight line directly back to the cemetery, let's try to keep this line on contour and on ridge lines to get back to the cemetery. This will make your road a lot more maintainable. You'll have to put a lot less effort and resources into the maintenance of the road, and while it may not look pretty as a direct shot, it'll be something that'll last you a lot longer than trying to cut through ravines and going up and over all these different changes in elevation. We also have a spur going down a ridge line and then across a contour here that takes you back to the old home site or your current campsite, and we'll talk more about that in the future. These next paths I've called walking paths, and they're going to be the paths where you're walking animals from one pasture to another. They're also paths that you may drive a tractor down, but not a full-size vehicle. We'll talk more about exactly how these tie into the different elements in the future. I just want you to see that they follow ridge lines and contours all throughout your property and act as an extension to get you deep into your property. Let's look a little bit about water on your property. You can see from the different labels here I've tried to identify a few different types of water flows. First, I wanted to show just the general surface runoff. This is the direction that water will generally follow contour as it runs off the surface of the property. Some of these are ravines where contours bring water into a location where during a rainfall we would be able to see water flow, but shortly after the rains it would just be a dry bed. Here is where the year-round creek is that you showed me, and it flows to the north. Also, we have the NRCS proposed dam site here. Now, I have a good deal to say about the structures on your property, and the first thing I want to draw your attention to is this animal loading area. I believe that as you expand your farm and you begin to have more animals that are being sent out for processing or that people are coming to you to purchase, that you're going to need a central location for all of that. And I believe this would be a prime location to do that. The next thing I'll mention to you is the greenhouse. I think you can make great use out of this current storage shed by expanding off the back of it and making a greenhouse. That'll of course give you the ability for you to start some plants earlier in the spring, and also a place for you to continue growing throughout the winter in your warm and humid climate. Just outside of the greenhouse would be an ideal place to put your worm bins, and also a place to process compost from throughout the site. The next thing I'll mention to you is the rainwater storage. We talked about all of the different hard surface areas on your property and just how much rainwater you could harvest. If we put storage containers at your campsite, your barn, your current home, your greenhouse, and the new home, we are looking at surface areas that would retain 250,000 gallons of water per year. Now, of course, it's not realistic to say that we're going to try to store 250,000 gallons, but as I will point out later, there are ways to distribute this water to other elements throughout the site that will be beneficial. The next thing is this shade house to the north of your current home. We talked about how to cool your home more efficiently, and this shade house will provide that to you. It will also act as a nursery for plants coming out of your greenhouse or any other plant that needs some temporary shelter. Not included in the picture is a solar chimney that would need to be placed at the south end of your house so that we can create a convection of air to draw in cool air from the shade house and take the hot air out the solar chimney. Currently, your chicken run comes off to the west of your barn. I believe it should be off to the east of your barn. That way nutrients can run downhill into your current garden. Making this change will give you more access to the nutrients from the chickens into your garden and cause you less work over time. I also think you should move your bees from your garden into the chicken pen. Now, it's impossible for me to illustrate it on this graphic, but we can construct you a riser for your bees that will keep the chickens out, still allow you access to the bees. And there's a connection to point out here. You're familiar with the pests that can affect bees. Most of them go into the ground for their larva stage, pupate, and then come back into the beehive. By placing the bees inside of a chicken run, the chickens will scratch at the dirt, eat the larva, and break the cycle, helping your bees be more healthy. Next is this specific area for your dairy pasture. With so many other animals going into so many different pastures, keeping your dairy animals close by will make your life easier in the future. Also, this area here, which has been used for pasture, would now be a great area for you to put your main crop, like corn, okra, and other big field crops like that. The rest of these black lines throughout the image are pastures, which you will see a little bit more clearly presented later. As we put together the different elements we've already talked about, you can kind of see how they start to tie together, but it'll be more clear as we move further into the design. You can see that you have access paths going through the pastures, and that pastures are designed around your other access areas. Now let's move into the actual pasture systems, because that's what Alderman Farms is going to focus on. You told me that you wanted to use this area primarily as a pasture area, and so here on contour are several different pastures that have been designed and fenced out for your use. You also told me that you would like to use this area specifically for your pigs. This area turns out to be a very beneficial area because it is on contour with the edge of this new home, which means that any water we harvest from this roof can be spread on contour over to the pig pens and provide for their water needs. You also told me that you wanted your meat poultry in this area, which worked out to be a good location, and I'll explain a little bit more of that in the future. The only thing I have specifically written in that was outside of your request was that your family dairy would be in this pasture, to save you from having to bring a cow out of pasture every day to bring over here for milking. Keeping just the animal or animals that you use for dairy for your family in this location will save you the effort of having to make that trip with an animal. Now let's move into a bunch of different forest systems, and the first forest system that I want to mention are the support trees for your animals. These are the trees that can be used as forage right along the fence line of the different pastures. This is not meant to represent a specific variety of tree, but rather a system that needs to be in place. So we're talking about nitrogen fixing trees that will provide support to the other trees that will provide the nutrition to the animals. You will notice that inasmuch as it was possible, you're going to find these plantings at the top and bottom of pastures. I avoided certain things like the right-of-way for the power company because I know of their right-of-way concerns may cause problems with us trying to plant trees that we want animals to forage off of. The next forest system are the food forests, and these vary depending on where they're located on the property. So to give you an example, right next to your house is the location where I would have you plant fruit trees, things that you're going to want to keep a close eye on and harvest readily. However, way out here toward the south side of your property, we can have large nut trees like pecans and walnuts, where you can harvest them whenever you happen to be out there. You will notice that your food forests are designed to either be right next to an access path or along contour where you can access it through a walkway and then walk along the contour to harvest your food. The next forest system I want to point out are forage trees. There are two different types that I want to point out to you. First are these lighter yellow that are specific plantings for bee forage. My point I want to make here is that we're not looking to plant a specific tree, but rather to replant the forest in this location with trees that would be abundant for bees. This dark orange here is cut forage and is placed right along this access path that borders the pasture for your dairy animals. The purpose of this is that as you walk down the path, you can cut forage that you dump over the fence to provide the food that your dairy animals need. The next forest system is your woodlot. This is the area that you would provide fuel for your home. You told me that you have a wood stove that provides for all the heating needs of your home throughout the winter. To do that in a sustainable way, you should be selecting wood from this location. If wood in this location does not suit your needs for burning wood, then particular plantings can be made with specific varieties that are ideal for that use. The next forest system is simply called the farm forest, or to look at it another way, it is where you would locate timber for making new construction or repairs on your property. There is a benefit to taking wood from this location than any other location on your property. You'll notice that it surrounds your shoot house. If you were to cut down trees in order to build a new structure, you're probably making a good sized clearing. A clearing enough that would make a pasture for animals like deer to be attracted to. By doing it in this location, you can bring deer into an area that you can then use your shoot house to harvest from. Another element that I will include here is a mushroom growing operation. This line of orange represents where I think you would be best served to grow mushrooms. It is directly on top of or next to the year-round creek that flows through your area. It's also a benefit to have it within reach of your shoot house because any animals that come in to forage the mushrooms that you are growing would also be harvestable from your shoot house. As we add in all the different forest systems we just spoke about, you can see the diversity throughout the property. At no location are we taking all of our resources from one specific area. It's spread throughout the property to provide good support and sustainability for everything. Another way for you to see your property is to look at it in terms of zones. Zones range from Zone 1 to Zone 5. We start in Zone 1 where the home is, or where the most activity and the most resources are used. To look at it another way, zones are separated by how often we access them, and when we do access them, how many resources do we take back from that area. For example, Zone 1 is highlighted here in white. Zone 1 includes your garden, which you may access many times in one day. But each time you access it, you may only bring back a few small items. Zone 2 is highlighted here in green. We're going to access this area a little less frequently, but whenever we harvest something from it, we're going to bring back a little bit more. So in here you're going to see some of your food forest, but not all of it. You're going to see your pasture for your meat poultry, your wood lot for use in your wood stove, and also the cut forage that you will provide to your dairy animals. Zone 3 clearly takes up the majority of Alderman Farms, and rightly so, because Zone 3 incorporates the grazing systems or pastures throughout your property. It also includes your broader food forest and also your main crop area. Zone 4 includes things like your farm forestry, your mushroom patch, and also your bee forage. And while you may not access the forest of the bee forage at all, you are going to harvest from the bees vicariously from this area every so often. Finally is Zone 5, or the area that we simply leave to nature. Well, Patty and Tommy, I hope that you enjoy the design that I have created for your beautiful farm. And I again thank you for allowing me to use your farm in my completion of this permaculture course so that I can become certified to do this for other people. I hope that your farm continues to grow and prosper, and I hope that as you continue to move forward that you'll include me in your progress so that I can be with you as Alderman Farms continues to grow.